So I'm going to make a video about my sanctification process. And there's no one that I haven't forgiven, because I always say we flee our immaturities or youthful lusts. So everybody that's been a part of your life has brought something to you, either wisdom or growth, a lesson or a blessing. But it's not hatred. We don't hate anybody, because if we were in obstinacy with that variable, we probably were yoked equally at the time of the state of that relationship. You yoke with the level of maturity or immaturity that you're at. That's why I always tell people, you'll date the same person in a different body until you heal the parts of you that are drawn to or attracted to or desiring that, or you don't know your worth, and you're going where you're accepted and not rejected. I've learned a lot of things coming to this cross. I look back at all my past relationships and the things that they brought to me or took away from me. And that's where I gained some of your greatest wisdom will come from your life trials and tribulations. In the world, you'll have trials. Well, when you're in your immaturities, depending upon your upbringing, your cultural implementations, expectations and stipulations, depending on your home, your familial expectancies. That's why I speak of generational curses and ancestral curses, because they are a part of what's at play in one's growth into a fallen world or lack thereof. I like I say, hindsight is always 20/20. We sometimes don't know things until we go through them. And this is why I say doing the same things and expecting a different result is insanity. So now having healthy boundaries doesn't mean I have hatred in my heart. But if you don't create a variable in your life, a righteous judgment for yourself to know what you should not be unequally yoked with, or what you should partake in, unequally yoked, bad company corrupts good morale. This is biblical too, and it's just logical at best sometimes, to where you have to take precautionary measures to make sure that you're not gonna, if you've made progress or growth in your life, especially me with coming to the cross, sanctifying myself, living holy. Now, there's nobody I won't talk to. I'm cordial and respectful. It says holiness and peace with all men. So I keep that into account. I take that into account because I know I'm being judged for what I do, and they're being judged for what they do. So as I say, they're not hurting me if they're living in rebellion. They're hurting themselves, because they're accountable for their sins. Every idle word and action goes in judgment. I'm not accountable for anybody's rebellion, although it might persecute me or hurt me. I'm pierced by their transgressions, because when you're living at the cross and other people aren't, it's going to affect or to have some toll or reality upon your perspective or perception, because that's why it says when we're at the cross, we fight the good fight of faith. It's harder to do what's right in a fallen world than it is to just fall away and do what everybody else is doing. Broad is the way to destruction, and many are going in. And this is where you're mourning in sackcloth, because you come into the truth, not just your own truth, but once you alleviate the discrepancies out of your own life or defilement, you'll start seeing that narrative operative in other people, not to condemn, but to convict or know what you shouldn't yoke with again. Because now I've healed from that variable. So I'm not going to do anything to go back into that oppression. And it's not like the only people that see it as hate is if you won't do what they want you to do, or be willing to go, or let them lead you astray. To be rejected by man is to be approved by God. So, I don't hate anybody. Believe me, I mourn for other people's despair at this point. That's what the mourning and sackcloth comes into, when the Lord takes you into the spirit of truth comes upon you, because you see where they're sitting in the things that you were able to overcome and conquer, and you know that they're struggling with it. That's the love of Christ in me. They're struggling with the things that you overcome, and you don't know or what words to give them or the wisdom they need to hear, because sometimes you could talk to somebody till they're blue in the face, until they're ready to deal with the parts that are unhealed or unhealthy, because that's what it is, removing the stony heart. So whatever took you aback or into that darkness from your failures, from your flaws, from your misinterpreted expectations, or whatever the case may be, those are the parts that you need to deal with. Whatever threw you into darkness is the things you need to overcome. You need to deal with all those heels, unhurts, the dirts, the discrepancies with what you thought what life should be, or what you thought someone was going to do for you and didn't, because you reap what you sow. You eat the fruits of your labor. So when you're at the cross, you no longer pray or desire the things you once did. Like me, I always say, like, God's greatest gifts are unanswered prayers. So I think back in all the relationships that, because my motives were always pure. I gave everything my all, always have, and I've always helped people, and I'm not boasting on that. Because if you've ever known what it feels like to not have certain things in your life, or have people fail you, you're not going to want other people to go through that. Some people think it's naiveness, but it's not. It's not naivety. It's love. It's love. You can want to help someone who's struggling when you're struggling yourself. That is love. That's not naivety. It's not being naive. That's having the love of Christ in you and saying, man, I feel your pain. I know where you're at. I'm the shoulder that you can cry on. I'm the person you can talk to that won't look down upon you for the things that you're struggling with. Because there's not a person in this world at this point that hasn't struggled with something. And this is your wisdom that comes from your life trials, to be able to help people out of the darkness they're in. If I hadn't experienced things myself, how would I be able to tell you about it, or bring understanding into you, or sit with you and say, I can relate? Some of the greatest prophets were sinners. A prophet, look up that word, it's just a teacher, a counselor, but we're not doing it for the wrong reasons. I guess a true prophet and the false prophet have the same wisdom, but what are they doing with the information? Are they restoring or destroying? Or are they using it for their favor? Like King Solomon or Yamabi, or a lot of those people who had evil desires in their heart. Yeah, the Lord blessed them, but what did they fall away to? Their devices and schemes, like Cain. He had a murderous spirit, an envious spirit, a jealousy. The Lord says never envy a wicked person. A wicked person to him is someone who's in sin or despair. I would never envy someone who's perishing, but I mourn for them. That's the mourning and sackcloth you go into when the Spirit of truth comes upon you, because you know people are struggling with their own sin or oppression or rebellion. Nobody, when they're a child, says, when I grow up, I want to be a failure. I want to be lost, or I want to struggle with these sins. Nobody says that in their adolescence. Nobody prays for that. I assure you of that. No child expects to be destroyed. And that's why I talk about generational curses. Broken parents raising broken children and failing them in the departments they needed growth. I always say you can't expect your child to walk in greatness if you're representing everything it's not. But we have parents that never were given the proper tools and obedience and skills to even have a family yet. This is why I talk about rebellion from the womb and unwanted pregnancy. So there is there's an unwanted bond, or there's a bond that never got created between mother and child, a hatred and envious spirit between that seed. That's why they say they'll pass that seed to the fire or give them over to Molech. I mean, putting them under a curse for whatever, maybe in your disparity, you lived under a curse, was reaching out for things you shouldn't have. And on that onset of that despaired life, you were showing your child how to accept the same variables and how to sit in fires that they should be uncomfortable in, but they got comfortable in them because they picked up your characteristic traits or flaws. Not because it was intended, but because it was shown. So sometimes we have to examine and judge ourselves. That's why I always say the Lord's not going to use somebody in sin. So when you're the child in the home, it says your own enemies will become of your house. This is how real the Bible got for me, because I broke off curses and now I'm addressing truths or untruths. Not because I have hatred or not because I'm condemning anybody. Because sin has to be acknowledged for it to be addressed. How do you heal a family if you're not willing to communicate the disparities or the disunities or the degradation or the derogatory lifestyles and behaviors? If you can't have communication lines opened up in your own family, then where does the solace come from? Where does the completeness come from? Where does the healing come in at? It doesn't. It won't. It won't without communication. And that's why I always say people want you to be better than they're willing to be, or tell them what they want to hear, but they don't want to hear what you have to say. That's a Jezebel or controlling or manipulative spirit. Wait a minute. You better be available to me, but I can't hear what you have to say. I don't want to hear that. I don't want to hear that. It's not what I want to hear. That is Jezebelic or Ahab in nature. That is someone who's saying, you're going to listen to me, but I'm not listening to you. And that's a manipulative, serpentine, cunning spirit in somebody. Because if the lines of communication are not open, how would you expect a relationship to endure the trials that it's going to be subject to? If you can't communicate, that's why I said you can't receive love if you're not willing to give it. You can't, like I said, you can't receive something from somebody who doesn't know how to give it to you either. If someone has a hardened heart to love and kindness, they can't give you something they don't have. So this is where the separation occurs. When you start getting the removal of the stony heart and it renews your mind, you start noticing the things that were, and now the things that used to be desirable for you become unattractive. That's why I always say I'll never date somebody in sin. Not because I think I'm better than anybody, because I know the despair it would bring into my life. I know that the unequally yoked, drinking the cup of devils and drinking the cup of the Lord. When people are in sin, they're fighting devils. Different levels of devils, depending on what they're going through. I've done deliverance, so I know this. No sin is acceptable in the eyes of the Lord. I'm not a false prophet. It says you're a royal priesthood, a holy generation. When the Lord put his hand on my life, I took the sanctification process because I've seen enough struggles and battles and dysfunctionality and marriages failed, lives being taken, cursed living, destroying them, children's futures being denied because of these variables that were existent in people's lives. That's not hatred. That's a sound mind saying, wait a minute, these are the things that cause people to go under, to destroy their lives. I'm not saying it was intended or meant, but it happens. And these are the things that must be addressed.